Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. So this one is going to be a little different, but something you've seen before. This is another sit-stand desk. This one is for my son, who's on a limited budget. The hardwood dealer had 8-foot goods, and he wants 60 inches on both sides, so there's not a lot of scrap. I'm going to do something I don't normally do, and that I'm going to cut these in the rough at the chop saw with a 45-degree angle on them, and then do the milling. I do have one spare board if we need it, and I'm just hoping these boards match up real nice because they're going to have to flip-flop. We are going to go with the potassium dichromate finish I did on my desk, which is really good at leveling the color out. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this stuff milled up, and we'll see how it goes. As I said before, I don't normally break material down this way. It's just not the safest option. Normally I would break this down with a jigsaw and then clean it up later. Everything else on the milling front is pretty much same as it normally is. I'll clean up one face here at the joiner and then go ahead and do one edge on the jointer as well. And then I will turn and run it through the planer to make that parallel face edge. And then, of course, run it through the table saw to finish up the four-side and make this as square as it can be. And from there, it was off to the glue up. I didn't use any dominoes for this for alignment. They all sat fairly flat and nice, so I just didn't see the need to add anything for that alignment. It is important here, though, to get those miters as close as you possibly can. And I do this by tightening up the middle clamps first to get a little pressure on it, and then coming back and tightening up the rest of them. I did have to add some angle blocks in here just to get this clamp up done as efficiently as possible. And from there, I went to the track saw using the woodpecker's track guide set to 45 and cleaned up the edge as best I could. To combine the two halves, I'm going to use these tabletop connectors. Now I created a little jig here just to locate for the larger holes that I need to drill with a Forstner bit. Now I loaded up the Forstner bit and drilled the holes to the appropriate depth. I did have to check these a few times, but overall they came out great. And then I used the Festool router and track guide to go ahead and route the trough between the two holes to allow for the bolt in those tabletop connectors. A quick test fit here just to make sure everything lines up as it should. And then I'm going to move on to the domino to add some alignment help for this joint. Now there is no glue in this joint. It is purely the tabletop connectors as well as the Festool domino to keep everything in alignment. And that is what holds this corner together. This will allow them to move independently with seasonal changes. Now my son is still renting, so this top needs to be able to come apart. So what I'm doing here is burning in some alignment marks to help him get everything lined up correctly later. I don't know if these are going to show through on the finish, but we'll find out in the other end. And one of the last things to do to this top is to go ahead and trim it to length. Again, the Festool track with the woodpecker's track guide to keep everything perfectly at 90 degrees. Kind of a last minute request from my son was to add in some tabletop power ports like I have in my desk. These are simply drilled with a hole saw, and I drilled them from both sides just to ensure that I don't have any blowout or tear out that I have to sand out and fix later. But this is pretty much the last thing we're going to do here before the finish. So the finish on this one is exactly the same as it was on my editing desk. It starts off with the potassium dichromate, which is already on here, followed up with a good heavy coat of amber shellac. From there, we will go in and we will add a glaze coat to it, which is what I'm doing here. And then we will let that sit for just a couple of minutes, and then we will come back and we will wipe all of that glaze back until it looks the way that we want it to look. It's a messy process, but it is really beautiful on this type of wood because that potassium dichromate reacts with the tannins in the wood so nicely. The last thing that I do after a couple more coats of amber shellac is to go ahead and rub this down with an old brown paper bag. It just does a wonderful job at removing any little dust nibs or anything that may have been left on the surface. Next up, to put a final finish coat on the whole thing, I'm using Rubio Monocoat Pure, and I'm applying with a white Scotch-Brite pad. I will put it on fairly liberally and then wipe back the excess after letting it sit for just a couple of minutes. After letting that Rubio Monocoat cure for probably a few days, I came back with the N3 Nano Coat, and I started off with the hard coat first. Admittedly, I'm not a big fan of these ceramic coatings. They do add a little bit of sheen, but I don't know that you really get much more protection out of it. But I followed their instructions pretty much to the letter, and I applied it and then waited about 90 seconds or so and came back and buffed everything in. I waited about an hour between coats, and I did 2 coats of the hard coat, and then I let that sit overnight and came back and put 2 coats of the top coat on. I should also say I started with their cleaner and made sure that the surface was perfectly clean before I started. Okay, so I thought I would go ahead and show the function of the desk, and then as well I put my microphone on, and I'm going to stand over here so you can hear just how quiet this really is. I was pretty impressed with how quiet it is. A note ahead of time, the cord management underneath is not done, and it won't be done until this is delivered to its final home. Let's go ahead and raise this one up. So as you see, it goes pretty high. For reference, I'm about 5'11", so this really does get up in the air quite a bit. The button pad is, of course, programmable, so you can set heights that you want and all that good stuff, but I'm not going to do that. I will leave that for the owner. So the last thing to do for this sit-stand desk is a little computer riser. Now, he uses a desktop computer, and I say desktop, but his whole focus for college and everything else is IT, so he's got a jumbo one. So we're going to build a little riser that has a little drawer in it to kind of match the desk and sit on top. And what I've done here is I've just glued up a couple of panels that will be the top and the bottom, and those 2 boards up there in the front will be the sides. Behind me, you'll see actually his original desk, and I think I built this one well over 10 years ago. Still in great shape, and it has moved several times, so it just needs a little love, a little refinish, and then we will probably pay it forward appropriately to somebody who needs a small desk. But in the meantime, let's get after this drawer. And I think we're going to do mitered corners on this one. So with the panels all glued up, I started over at the table saw, which I have tilted to 45. Admittedly, I should have a throat plate in there. I didn't currently have a throat plate that fit my 45-degree blade in there, so I opted to run without it. Next up at the table saw, I set the fence just to create a little rabbet for a back panel to sit in. I didn't bother installing the dado stack for this. With all the miters cut, I took it back to the bench and laid everything out and got the grain matches that I wanted, and then taped everything up kind of like I would a normal small box, even though this is a little bit bigger. From there, I went ahead and wrapped everything up and did a dry fit so that I could measure for the back panel. I cut the back panel and glued it in at the same time as the glue up, as you'll see here in a minute. But in hindsight, I wish I would not have done that because these drawer glides in this one were really difficult to install. The glue up went fairly smooth and there weren't really any issues. In hindsight, I wish that I would have taped off those inside edges just to prevent the squeeze out. I did have a little bit more squeeze out than I would have liked. But it is what it is, and everything came together as it should. It just created me having to do a little bit of chisel work to get some of the glue squeeze out, and so that I could get the drawer glides in. Another good thought would have been to install the drawer glides before I glued everything up, but I didn't do that. Then with everything out of clamps, I could go ahead and remove all of the tape and see how the seams came out. Ultimately, the seams came out really well. I was very impressed at how well the seams came out. So it was pretty much just a matter of sanding and getting everything tidied up and prep for finish. And of course, I still have to build a drawer. Now, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on the drawer. It's built in solid sapele, and it's really built the same way that I've built most of the drawers that I've done in the recent videos. So, here's the final box. Turned out pretty cool. It'll look great on top of the desk. I did install some small rubber feet on the bottom, and I didn't top this one with Rubio. This one is actually topped with sprayed lacquer so that I could cover the inside of the drawer as well. Overall, I think it turned out great. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. And until next time, take care.